At first, many of the tourists in Dealey Plaza thought it was just a bad joke. They could not believe that while they were taking pictures of the school book depository, someone was trying to assassinate President Reagan.
We just walked out of the museum there and someone said that, and my first reaction was, I just thought they were just really joking. That's a bad joke to be playing, and the guy was all upset and really red about the whole thing.
But when news of the assassination attempt was confirmed by others, reaction was one of shock, a disbelief that nearly 18 years later the same thing seemed to be happening again.
We're from Canada. We just flew in today, and we have not listened to any media, and we had no idea. I'm flabbergasted that it should happen again. That's absolutely amazing.
And this man, who had been taking relatives on a tour of Dallas, perhaps exemplified the reaction of most when he walked out of Dealey Plaza in disgust.
It just boggles your mind that at this point in time and at this moment that this could happen. I just can't believe it.
What does this make you feel about presidents and their safety?
Sick. Just hurts. I thought that was behind us, and oh Lord, I don't even want to talk about it.
Steve Forsberg, Channel 8 News.
They want to be centrally located at the hospital itself because it's closer. Of course, the situation...
Decision has not been made about whether the president will undergo surgery, although I guess it can be. So he's now on his way.
Well, I'm just appalled. I think we're such good people in this country, and it makes us look so bad to the rest of the world. And I'm as shocked as everybody else.
Scary.
Why?
Well, it kind of brings back that feeling of when the community got it. It's the same kind of panicky.
Very sad. It's real disgusting, shock, and think somebody my own age could be out trying to learn, somebody that's trying to do so much for us, It's just real upsetting. Really leaves an feeling inside of you.
Well, it's surprising and all, and of course not unexpected, in these times. So probably happen again sometime or another.
Secret Service agents came to Highland Park minutes after it was learned that Hinckley had lived with his family in this house in the 3500 block of Beverly. Most of the people in this neighborhood had moved here in the last 5 years, after the Hinkleys left Highland Park for Colorado. One neighbor, Brooks Norfleet, is a director in Vanderbilt Energy Corporation, a company headed by Hinckley's father. Norfleet knows the Hinckley family well, but remembers little about the younger Hinckley.
I remember him just as kind of a very young kid.
Do you remember anything about him?
No. None other than he was a kind of a nice-looking little boy, just an ordinary, everyday little kid.
Very average?
I suppose so.
From an average family? You knew the family much better.
Yes, I knew his mother and father very well.
This, I'm sure, surprised you.
Quite a surprise.
A woman who lived next door to Hinckley, who didn't want to be identified, said the younger Hinckley used to take care of her yard, seemed quiet and very average from an ideal family. Charles Duncan, Channel 8 News, Highland Park. This is Charles Duncan. Hinckley grew up here in Highland Park. 3520 Beverly Drive was home for Hinckley during most of his high school years. Most of the people in this neighborhood have moved here in the last 5 years after the Hinkleys left Highland Park for Colorado. One neighbor, Brooks Norfleet, is a director in a corporation headed by Hinckley's father. Norfleet remembers the younger Hinckley as an average teenager.
I remember him just as kind of a very young kid.
Do you remember anything about him?
No. None other than he was a kind of a nice-looking little boy, just an ordinary, everyday little kid.
Another neighbor who didn't want to be identified says Hinckley was very average, nothing unusual, much like his brother and his sister. Secret Service agents were in Hinckley's old neighborhood today, asking questions about the suspect. They, too, learned Hinckley was an average, nice-looking teenager. Charles Duncan, Channel 8 News, Highland Park.
Within 2 hours of the shootings in Washington, federal agents in Dallas were at Rocky's pawn shop on Elm Street to seize records. The records show on October 13, 1980, John W. Hinckley purchased two .22 caliber revolvers, both the same model, similar to this one, priced at less than $50.
He bought two at the same day. There was two involved.
What was the other one?
Same caliber, same guy and a gun, same model.
As part of all handgun transactions, Hinckley had to answer a number of questions about his past.
Has he ever been convicted of a felony? Has he ever been in a mental institution? Is he a narcotic user? Is he an illegal alien in this country? Has he been dishonorably discharged from the armed services?
And he answered no to all those questions?
That's right.
ATF agent Doris Jackson refused to answer questions about the seizure of the records, but both the Division of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and the FBI made copies of the records of the handgun sale for their investigation. Jack Chestnut, Channel 8 News. Serial numbers on the guns seized in Washington were traced to Rocky's pawn shop in downtown Dallas. Within hours of the shooting, FBI and Treasury Department officers arrived to confiscate store records. The forms show on October 13, 1980, John W. Hinckley bought 2 handguns like this one, a 6-shot 22 caliber revolver.
I'd rather not make any statements. David, I need you to sign the back of this, please.
Treasury Officer Doris Jackson refused to comment on whether one of the guns bought in Dallas was used to fire the shots outside the Washington Hilton. Store owner Isaac Goldstein says he doesn't remember anything about Hinckley, but he says the young man's background apparently qualified him to purchase the handguns.
Has he ever been convicted of a felony? Has he ever been in a mental institution? Is he a narcotic user? Is he an illegal alien in this country? Has he been dishonorably discharged from the armed services?
And he answered no to all those questions?
That's right.
Later this evening, Goldstein said he had already received telephone threats for selling Hinckley the guns. And now Goldstein says he has hired extra security people to help protect his store. Jack Chestnut, Channel 8 News.
28-year-old Diane Catherine Sims lives on this quiet street in the White Rock Lake area. The sister of John Hinckley graduated from Highland Park High School 2 years ahead of him. She was popular, a cheerleader, nominated for Homecoming Queen. Diane married Steve Sims of Mahia. He's now assistant manager of the Mutual of New York life insurance agency here in Dallas. They have a 3-year-old son and a baby girl. Today, neighbors gathered on the street, unable to believe what they were hearing on the news. One young man told us a number of people arrived at the house, and then suddenly Mr. and Mrs. Sims and the rest of them jumped into 3 cars and sped away.
Oh, they're the nicest people you've ever met. Always friendly. They weren't today because they just ran out to the cars and they all took off.
David Kerr works with Steve Sims. He told us Sims heard the word that John Hinckley had been arrested this afternoon, that Sims suddenly left the office and hurried home to his wife.
Mr. Kerr, do you know why everyone left in such a hurry? We understand.
Because too many phone calls and too many people knocking on the door.
Do you know where
you can
they're
understand? Yes, I do.
Will they be back? Will there be any way to contact them?
Not in the near future.
Have they gone into seclusion for an indefinite amount of time?
They've gone into seclusion. That's a good way to put it.
Simply to avoid the reporters' phone calls and being bothered?
Yes, that phone's ringing in there constantly.
Are we going with
calls from Cleveland and every place else?
Kerr told us Hinckley's sister and her husband haven't yet decided what they'll do now. They're waiting to talk with other relatives, possibly Hinckley's mother and father in Colorado. People out here still seem stunned, trying to deal with a shocking event that happened far away, but hit close to home. Bill Brown, Channel 8 News.
John Warnock Hinckley Jr. graduated from Highland Park High School in 1973, attended McCullum Middle School and Armstrong Elementary School. Hinckley began studying business administration at Texas Tech after graduating from Highland Park High. He was last enrolled as an arts and sciences major at Tech in early summer 1980. Even though he was at Highland Park 3 years, Hinckley left no lasting impression on the faculty.
I recall very little, except I have seen his picture. I saw him in the hall, and I have no idea. If I could see a picture of the young man that was apprehended, I probably would be able to identify.
Just what kind of student John Hinckley was is recorded in student counseling files here. School administrators are not opening those files to the public until they get the okay from their attorney. Until then, we won't know what kind of student he was, how faculty regarded him, and what kind of grades John Hinckley made here. Robert Riggs, Channel 8 News, Highland Park.
Those who remember John Warnock Hinckley Jr. say the 25-year-old suspect can be described simply as average and a little shy. Hinckley graduated from Highland Park High School in 1973, and during that time, old high school acquaintances say the young man wasn't exceptionally bright, but he did manage to make passing grades. One former classmate says she and other girls in school used to have a crush on Hinckley because they thought he was attractive and was always friendly towards them.
He was real quiet and shy, but he was real nice looking. He was a real nice person. Everybody knew him.
Kirk Dooley met Hinckley on the basketball court back in the 7th grade. They were friends until he lost track of Hinckley at Texas Tech in 1973. He says the friend he knew was not capable of such an outrageous act.
And he was just like a standard middle to upper income, all-American, squeaky clean boy. He really was. He had blonde hair, blue eyes, good-looking guy, the kind of guy that everybody liked. That's what's so unusual about this, in my opinion. You know, you have all kinds of people. Some of them everyone likes, some of them they're kind of strange. But John was the kind of guy that had no enemies.
Although the most memorable thing about Hinckley was his ability to keep a low profile in school, he did participate in some campus organizations. He was a member of the Spanish, government, and rodeo clubs. But even those faculty sponsors have little to say about him.
I remembered him from the picture in the annual that I looked at, and that's all I can say.
Any other information about Hinckley's background in Dallas is locked away in the Highland Park High School counseling office, and officials there won't open up the files until asked to by federal authorities. After high school, most of the people who knew him just lost track of his whereabouts. It is known he attended Texas Tech University, majoring in arts and sciences, but he left Lubbock to attend Yale University in Connecticut, only to drop out just a few months ago. Uma Pemaraju, Channel 8 News.
George Bush canceled his speech to the Texas legislature but stopped at the Austin Municipal Airport to refuel for the return trip home. Air Force Two was on the ground for only 20 minutes before it took off for Washington. Vice President Bush remained secluded in the plane's state cabin for the duration of the flight, in constant phone contact with members of his staff in Washington and Secretary of State Alexander Haig. In a nearby cabin, several congressmen, including Democrat Jim Wright, gathered to watch TV reports. There was general confusion as Bush's assistant press secretary updated reports on the shooting to anxious reporters on the plane. Unlike a commercial flight, the priority plane made the trip from Austin to Washington in a little over 3 hours, and Vice President Bush made a quick exit once Air Force Two was on the ground. Air Force Two pulled into a hangar here, and George Bush departed for a helicopter on the other side of the hangar. He reportedly will go first to his residence and then most likely to the White House. At Andrews Air Force Base, House Majority Leader Wright stopped to express his outrage over today's shootings. Congressman, what was the mood on the plane today as you were coming back?
Well, first, of course, one of shock, one of utter disbelief. Even after all the insane things that have happened in these last 18 years, we still find it very difficult to comprehend that anyone would be so insane as to attempt to take the life of a president.
Did you speak with Mr. Bush at all?
Oh, yes.
What was his mood?
His mood is one of sympathy for a friend, one of disbelief that anyone could create enough malice in his mind to want to take the life of Ronald Reagan.
Barbara White, Channel 8 News, Washington.
This is Dave Cassidy. The Fort Worth police helicopter was hovering over Carswell Air Force Base this morning for the arrival of Vice President George Bush. One would hardly expect a security risk at an Air Force base, but as a matter of routine, police were taking no chances. Bush's first stop was at the Hyatt Regency Hotel, the old Hotel Texas, where President John Kennedy spent his last night before going to Dallas November 22nd, 1963. Again at the hotel, security was heavy, but there's only so much security people can do when public officials go out in public. Bush could have been a target when he unveiled a plaque at the hotel, or when he decided to go shake hands with spectators along the ropes. Luckily, he wasn't. Bush was also quite visible at the Tarrant County Convention Center, in a room packed with several thousand people. Fortunately, nobody attending the Southwestern Cattle Raisers Convention wanted to harm the vice president, and after giving a speech urging support for President Reagan and his economic policies, Bush headed back to Carswell for a flight to Austin. Shortly after 1:30, Bush and his entourage were on the plane, safe and sound, ready to take off. That's when a gunman opened fire on Ronald Reagan. Dave Cassidy, Channel 8 News, Fort Worth.
Described as a scripture of faith and strength, some 30 members of the University Christian Church began their prayer service for the president and the others with Psalm 46. The people of this church and its pastor, Dr. A.M. Pennybacker, have known in the last 2 weeks what it's like to garner spiritual faith and strength in a trying time. Part of their building was gutted by fire set by an arsonist on the 13th. But tonight, their prayers were for others.
Especially the President of the United States, Ronald Reagan. Let us pray for his care and his healing, especially his aide, Mr. Brady, and his family, the officers injured in the line of their duty and their families.
There was a prayer for the man who allegedly did the shooting, John Hinckley Jr.
Yet, our Father, this misshapen one is also thy child. Minister to him even in his darkness. And if he can stand the reality of his deed, then let him face it to measure anew, to grieve, to turn, to change.
And there was also one for the nation, that it might equal, in the pastor's words, this night of trial and despair. Brad Watson, Channel 8 News, Fort Worth.
This is Steve Forsberg. Most of the political activities in Dallas tonight have been canceled because of the assassination attempt, but at Dallas County Republican headquarters, a handful of volunteers continue to address mailouts, and they cannot believe the assassination attempt occurred at the Washington Hilton. Jan Holderman attended a convention at the same hotel over the weekend and says that with so many policemen around, it seemed to be such a safe place.
I was real surprised because that's where we had our National Young Republican Conference the whole weekend, and it was perfectly safe the whole time. I never was afraid, and I'm really surprised that it happened there.
But most other people have never been to that hotel. They were shocked that the attack had occurred at all. In department stores in downtown Dallas this afternoon, people stopped what they were doing at the news and rushed to nearby TV sets in disbelief. But for some of those visiting Dealey Plaza at the time, the reaction was even stronger.
It just boggles your mind that at this point in time and at this moment that this could happen. I just can't believe it.
What does this make you feel about presidents and their safety?
Sick. Just hurts. I thought that was behind us, and oh Lord, I don't even want to talk about it.
Steve Forsberg, Channel 8 News.
The Secret Service agents were sweeping the House chambers and checking television cameras to be sure it was safe for Vice President Bush's visit here when word came of the shooting. At first, the agents stepped up their searches, anticipating Bush would still appear, but under tighter security. At the same time, reporters in the air aboard the Vice President's plane from Fort Worth were receiving updated reports as they approached Austin.
Our first report to you all was erroneous. The President was shot in the left chest. He is in stable condition.
Bush's plane did land at the Austin airport. It was on the ground here for about 40 minutes, but Bush never came out. Governor Bill Clements did go inside for a briefing on the situation and emerged to say Bush would be going on to Washington without speaking to the legislature. Once the plane had been refueled and serviced, it took off for Andrews Air Force Base. Back at the Capitol, House Speaker Billy Clayton gavelled the House and Senate into a joint session, half an hour later than planned. And instead of a briefing from the Vice President, it was a prayer service for the members to express their concern and their hope for a speedy recovery by the President and the others shot.
It's a tragic thing that in our country we have people of this unstable mind that can create this sort of a situation.
The legislators also adopted a resolution denouncing the assassination attempt, calling it an attack on the American democratic system. Carol Nealon, Channel 8 News in Austin. The Secret Service agents were making their final sweep of the Texas House floor in anticipation of the Vice President's visit when the word came that the President had been shot.
It's a horrible and deplorable situation. It makes you wonder what our country's coming to when its leaders are no longer safe to walk among the public.
Word reached the vice presidential party while Bush's plane was still in the air between Fort Worth and Austin. Bush didn't talk to reporters then or while his plane was on the ground at the Austin airport. But during the 40 minutes it took to refuel the plane, Governor Bill Clements talked to Bush inside.
He was terribly concerned and very calm, of course, but terribly concerned, as we all are.
Clements was the one to announce the vice president would not be making his appearance before the legislature. Bush's plane took off for Andrews Air Force Base just as House Speaker Billy Clayton gavelled the legislature into a joint session. It was to have been a briefing by Bush on how Reagan's proposed cutbacks would affect Texas. But instead, the legislators passed a resolution denouncing the assassination attempt as an attack on the American democratic system.
It's a tragic thing that in our country we have people of this unstable mind that can create this sort of a situation.
The legislators then bowed their heads in prayer, expressing their deep concern and asking for a speedy recovery for the president and the others shot. Carol Nealon, Channel 8 News in Austin. There are no Texas state laws governing the sale of handguns, such as the .22 caliber revolver federal records show was purchased by John Hinckley at Rocky's Pawn Shop in Dallas. And in a state where it's considered a person's right to carry a shotgun in the window of his pickup truck, the legislature's not likely to get into the business of regulating handgun sales. In fact, a majority of the handgun bills introduced into the legislature this time seek to relax the relatively loose restrictions on the carrying of handguns in this state. A few would expressly prevent the carrying of handguns to political rallies and speeches, but only one by Dallas State Representative Paul Ragsdale would regulate the sale of handguns. Ragsdale's bill requires that a gun dealer take down the name, address, and birth date of anyone buying a handgun, that after checking 2 forms of identification. The dealer couldn't actually turn over the handgun to the buyer for another 48 hours after the sale. And the dealer could not sell handguns at all to anyone who'd ever been convicted of a crime or committed to a mental institution.
I'm not seeking to ban handguns entirely, but I think we do need a better system of permitting use of handguns and a better way of tracking handguns.
What that would do would be to take away guns from people that have them in their house to defend themselves, and would not, in my opinion, deter the criminal at all from getting guns.
That's the sort of knee-jerk response legislators have when you ask them about Ragsdale's bill.
It's always been a question of whoever wants to take the law in their hands are the ones that are going to have be able to obtain a firearm some way or the other anyway. Outlawing them is not going to be the solution.
When it was pointed out to House Speaker Clayton that Ragsdale's bill would only make it harder to buy handguns, not ban them, the Speaker said he'd give it a fair hearing in the House. But if the bill gets heard, it will be the first time since Ragsdale introduced it in 1975. He's not optimistic. What kind of reception do you think you get from the legislature in general?
About the same kind I'd get from President Reagan.
Which is?
No.
Carol Nealon, Channel 8 News in Austin.
After 51 years quietly running a small pawn shop in Dallas, Isaac Rocky Goldstein has become famous overnight, thrust into the world spotlight by a cheap little handgun that cost $47. As photographers snapped away today and the reporters lined up for interviews, Goldstein said he never broke a single law, but he's sure sorry that one of his guns hurt 4 people, including the President of the United States. Do you share any of the blame for what happened to President Reagan?
Well, I don't think I'm to blame, but I'm very unhappy about it. Very unhappy it's my president that was shot. And I'm unhappy that the gun was bought for me. I don't want this kind of publicity.
The salesman who actually sold the Saturday night special has quit, says he won't sell guns again. And Goldstein tells us he's still getting phone calls from people who threatened to kill him and who threatened to burn down his store. The elderly merchant says he can't sleep now. He's had to move out of his house and hire a bodyguard. If it keeps up, he says, he'll have to call it quits and sell out. The old man just wanted to make a living, not make history.
I'm talking to you, but I'm scared inside. Well, if people don't harass me, I'll stay. If people are going to harass me, I'll get out.
Bill Brown, Channel 8 News.
Security has tightened around the vice president's mansion in the aftermath of the assassination attempt on the president. And George Bush is home tonight after working double duty today. When George Bush arrived at the White House early this morning, there were some questions concerning his role and responsibility during Reagan's recovery period. But those questions were answered at a White House press briefing this morning, leaving little doubt that the president remains in charge of the nation's government.
can assure you that whatever decisions are required, the President will make them, and he'll certainly be consulting with the Vice President, and they will meet today.
Bush stood in for the President at several functions today, presiding over a cabinet meeting and hosting a group of congressional leaders at the White House. But the number 2 man's presence before television cameras was kept low-key. In a brief visit with the President at George Washington Hospital, Bush avoided the news crews by entering and exiting through a side door. Later at a ceremony with the Dutch Prime Minister on the White House South Lawn, Bush offered his own medical report on the President's condition.
Was very pleased at the way he looked. He, in his typical unfailing thoughtfulness, asked me to convey his regards here, and then also asked about my wife, and everything seems so normal.
Tomorrow, Bush will follow a light schedule. Thursday, he's expected to stand in for the President as host to diplomats from Turkey and Poland. Barbara White, Channel 8 News, Washington.
Air Force Two was winging its way from Austin to Washington when Secretary of State Alexander Haig met with reporters at the White House. His statement angered some of the people who watched it aboard the Vice President's plane.
As of now, I am in control here in the White House, pending return of the Vice President, and I'm in close touch with him. If something came up, I would check with him, of course.
Congressman Jim Collins spent 3 hours in a lounge aboard Air Force Two. Collins and Congressman Jim Wright were the only people outside the Bush entourage to observe the Vice President during the crisis. Collins says Bush provided the kind of cool head needed in a crisis, loosening his tie, donning a lightweight flight jacket, and says Collins, unlike Haig, never appearing to make a grab for power.
All of the time, he just assumed that Reagan was going to be in charge. It wasn't one of these fellows that was trying to take charge too soon. I said, George, I said, suppose something happened that you were placed in the chair of responsibility. He said, well, in that event, they've got it set up 1, 2, 3, 4. And he said, I'll just follow the normal procedure. But that's all he said. He never...
Even those who think Haig's remarks were not out of line believe his actions yesterday will serve to reinforce his negative image. Ultimately, President Reagan will have to decide Secretary of Haig's fate. If the President decides Haig was making a grab for power, Congressman Collins says the President won't have many choices. Says Collins, you can't discipline a Secretary of State. You either keep him or fire him. David Margulies, Channel 8 News, Washington.
The headlines and the pictures are becoming all too familiar. The presidency almost always has been a favorite target of assassins. But why would someone want to kill a president? It's a question Ronald Tobias has spent years trying to answer. Tobias is an assistant professor at the University of Texas at Dallas. He is also the author of a book being published that in part profiles the killers and would-be assassins of this country's presidents. Tobias says suspect John Hinckley has much in common with those who have shot at other presidents. Hinckley is white, between 25 and 35 years old, and allegedly used a handgun at close range. All presidents who have been murdered, with the exception of John Kennedy, were shot at close range with a pistol. Most assassins, Tobias says, have been identified with some type of political cause. Hinckley had been a member of a neo-Nazi group.
It's not unusual for people such as Hinckley appears to be to have been good citizens their entire life and never been in trouble with the law. And when you think about it, it makes sense because people who are in trouble with the law are not over-controlling their aggression, they're letting it flow freely.
Tobias says the man who shot the president probably reached an emotional breaking point, that he held back his feelings, whatever they were, until...
There it is. Shots. From the evidence that they've been able to accumulate so far, Hinckley is a stalker, which means he takes opportunity of time and place, which may vary in order to kill someone, and follows the victim in the way you would stalk a deer.
Tobias says his book will help police understand the nature and motives of assassins. His book is scheduled to be published soon, but will probably be delayed until he writes one more chapter, The Shooting of President Reagan. Charles Hadlock, Channel 8 News.
A couple of days ago, Rocky Goldstein was just a guy who's run a little Dallas store for 51 years. Now, he's the most famous pawn shop owner in the world, all because a gun he sold made history. The 70-year-old merchant is the center of attention, but some he could do without. The crank calls, the threats to kill him and blow up his store.
I'm not happy because our president's been shot with a gun that came from my store. And I don't know what any kook with this. A man would shoot the president. It has to be a nut. There's some other nuts running around, too.
The shop owner now has an armed bodyguard near him. He says he can't sleep at night, and he's moved out of his house. If all the hatred keeps coming his way, Goldstein told us, he'll close up his shop and retire.
I'm 70 years of age, and with all this that's happened now, I don't know. I may retire. I don't know.
You seriously thinking of that?
I'm seriously thinking of it. Because I will be harassed from now on, not by the press, but by people, cookies that blame me for the president getting shot.
The salesman who worked here and sold the Saturday night special traced to the assassination attempt has quit. He didn't like all the pressure and says he won't sell guns again. Federal agents are still going over this shop's records, and they won't answer questions about them. Meanwhile, Goldstein says he obeyed all the laws, but he feels terrible about his gun being used to shoot the president. And what about all the threats against him? Will he carry a gun to protect himself?
Thanks, Tracy, and good evening from the nation's capital, where a somewhat somber mood prevails on an otherwise gorgeous spring day. The business of running the government went on as usual here in the nation's capital, with the vice president assuming the president's schedule, but at the same time assuring the world that there has been no shakeup in our government and that the president is still firmly in control. Channel 8's Barbara White spent the day with the vice president. Here is her report.
With sirens blaring, the vice president's motorcade arrived at the White House around 7:30 this morning. George Bush was preparing to fulfill his duties and some of the president's duties as well. While Bush held a morning staff meeting, the White House press office held a news conference. And despite the president's hospitalization, officials say Reagan continues to direct the country.
I can assure you that whatever decisions are required, the president will make them, and he'll certainly be consulting with the vice president, and they will meet today.
Nearby at George Washington Hospital, the president's daughter Maureen and son Mike arrived for a visit. But Vice President Bush chose to avoid the lines of cameras and reporters gathered at a park across the street. Bush entered through a side door and after a very brief visit with the president, left the hospital unnoticed. Later this afternoon, Bush took his place on the White House South Lawn with the Netherlands Prime Minister, filling the president's role of meeting with visiting dignitaries. In this case, Bush took the opportunity to discuss his hospital visit with the president and offer some reassuring words to the crowd.
We feel very relieved in this country at what appears to be a very speedy recovery, and I know he would want me to say, as you leave these grounds, farewell and Godspeed, and come back, sir. Thank you very much.
After the ceremony, the vice president returned to his West Wing office. Aides say Bush spent the rest of the afternoon in meetings. He and other top-level officials are doing their best to show the country that in the aftermath of an assassination attempt on the president, neither the White House nor the administration has skipped a beat. Barbara White, Channel 8 News, Washington.
While Vice President Bush spent the day assuring the nation and the world that everything was under control, it's been reported that there were some anxious moments yesterday aboard Air Force Two on the return flight from Texas to Washington. Channel 8's David Margulies talked with Congressman Jim Collins about that situation.
Congressman Jim Collins was among the handful of people with George Bush during those awful moments after the attempted assassination. As Air Force Two winged its way from Austin to Washington, Collins joined Congressman Jim Wright and close Bush aides in a lounge at the front of the plane. Two Air Force security men relayed news to the vice president from the White House Situation Room. But Collins says Bush often emerged from his office to watch replays of the shooting on a television set in the lounge. Collins says Bush never assumed he held the reins of presidential power.
All of the time, he just assumed that Reagan was going to be in charge. It wasn't one of these fellows that was trying to take charge too soon.
That was not the case, says Collins, with Secretary of State Alexander Haig. Collins says he and close Bush aides were angered when the television in Air Force Two broadcast this statement by the Secretary of State.
As of now, I am in control here in the White House, pending return of the Vice President, and in close touch with him. If something came up, I would check with him, of course.
And it really did shock me. It really shocked me the way that he had that attitude. It was so obvious that he's a man that wants to just take charge. He feels his power too much.
Collins says Vice President Bush said nothing when told of Haig's statement, which was seen by some as a necessary show of strength, mostly for foreign consumption.
Well, he's pushy and he's aggressive, all right. But again, the fact that he was there to help in time of crisis, I think is perfectly all right, so long as the Vice President was out of touch because he was flying back from Texas.
The man who will ultimately decide Haig's fate is still recuperating here at George Washington University Hospital. President Reagan will have to decide whether Haig's statements were appropriate during a crisis or were a grab for power. If the decision goes against Haig, Congressman Collins says the president's options are limited. Collins says you can't discipline a Secretary of State. You either have to keep him or fire him. David Margulies, Channel 8 News, Washington.
Is that just like the one, Rocky?
Right here, Rocky.
70-year-old Rocky Goldstein has become an overnight celebrity. Everybody wants to snap his picture. Reporters are calling him from London to Tokyo, asking for interviews. All because he sold 2 Saturday Night Special handguns, one of which made history. But there's a dark side to his instant fame. People are also calling and threatening to kill him, to burn his shop down, to blow it up.
I'm scared inside.
Why?
Any kook can walk in here now with a gun in his pocket or a knife and cut my throat. I have no way of knowing. I'm open to the public. I walk out of here, I'm open to the public. Go into my car, I'm open to the public. And there are crazy people.
Goldstein told us he hardly got any sleep last night. He's had to move out of his house and take all the phones off the hook. He says, why am I getting the blame for shooting the president? I didn't break any laws. I sold those guns legally.
Well, I've been here 51 years. I want to work my years. I'm making a living here, not getting rich. If I'd have gotten rich, I'd have been retired a long time ago. I can't live on Social Security, so I've got to try to make a living. But if I got people threatening my life, I'll have to get out.
The elderly shop owner now has a bodyguard. Today he called the Dallas Police Bomb Squad after new threats. There was no bomb. Goldstein still feels gun control probably won't work, but he says one thing might help, a national identity card to be carried by every American. You'd have to show it to buy any gun. The FBI has confiscated all the shop's gun records and won't comment on them. The salesman who actually sold the 2 pistols, allegedly to John Hinckley, has quit. Rocky Goldstein says he's sure of one thing. If he does stay in business, he'll get rid of all the guns and never sell weapons again. Bill Brown, Channel 8 News.
Glenn Watts for that
Kennedy said what happened to President Reagan represents the breakdown of order and the triumph of violence. The senator whose family has been devastated by assassins' bullets said that with 55 million handguns in circulation, there is an endless guerrilla warfare in our country, and he said it is time to disarm violent criminals.
My family has been touched by violence, and too many others have felt the same terrible force. Too many children have been raised without a father or a mother, and too many widows have lived out their lives alone. Too many people have died. On gun control, I will not give up or give in.
Kennedy said that before the latest flash of gunfire fades from our national conscience must come a new sense of purpose. He is introducing legislation this week calling for the control of cheap handguns. It is the same legislation that President Reagan has opposed in the past. Mike Von Fremd, ABC News, Washington.
White House physician Daniel Ruge says the president is experiencing some pain, but is in good condition. Mr. Reagan has been able to walk around his private room, is now eating solid foods. His news secretary, James Brady, remains in critical condition. But significantly, Brady has been able to move both arms and both legs, catch a wadded gauze ball, and even talk. The president talked with senior aides today. He signed an executive order on trade matters, read newspapers, and watch television. Mr. Reagan has received more flowers than he knows what to do with, so they're being shared with other patients, other hospitals, nursing homes, and churches. 7,500 telegrams and mailgrams have been addressed to the president, in addition to cables of concern from 80 world leaders, Soviet President Leonid Brezhnev, Cuba's Fidel Castro, and Pope John Paul, to mention 3. First Lady Nancy Reagan arrived at the hospital in the early afternoon. She brought the president a robe, his slippers, and perhaps most important, a jar of jelly beans. Bill Greenwood, ABC News, the White House.
At first sight, the entrance to the Marine base doesn't appear overly secured, but several miles inside at the correctional facility site, extra military police have been posted to keep unwanted visitors out. The man accused of attempting to assassinate the president and wounding 3 others is being housed with military prisoners charged with offenses ranging from disobedience to theft. Hinckley was reportedly moved here because other area prison facilities are too crowded.
There are 75 military prisoners in there now and accommodates 150. He is physically separated from the Navy and Marine Corps prisoners.
Hinckley is in the custody of the U.S. Marshal Service. It has provided 25 additional guards, and Hinckley remains under a 24-hour watch. Today, the 25-year-old underwent a court-ordered competency screening. The tests were conducted to learn if Hinckley understands that he has been charged with attempted assassination of the president and to see if he is capable of assisting lawyers in his defense. The Washington firm of Williams & Conley has been retained to defend Hinckley. Attorneys reportedly met with him at Quantico yesterday. Federal officials have recovered letters written by Hinckley that reveal he apparently had a fantasy relationship with actress Jodie Foster. And as Hinckley was undergoing psychiatric testing here today, Ms. Foster held a press conference in New Haven.
Do you have any feeling that this episode is going to be a major change, cause any major change in your life?
Well, I know that it won't cause any major change in my life on campus because I know that people have accepted me here, and that is part of the whole thing. And they are just very intelligent and they know how to deal with that. The only thing that it will change is if the media comes in and starts roaming around, which I'm sure that there will be, a few of those, and I can understand that, but hopefully it won't be too bad.
Barbara White, Channel 8 News, Washington. At first sight, the entrance to the Marine base doesn't appear overly secured, but several miles inside at the correctional facility site, extra military police have been posted to keep unwanted visitors out. The man accused of attempting to assassinate the president and wounding 3 others is being housed with military prisoners charged with offenses ranging from disobedience to theft. Hinckley was reportedly moved here because other area prison facilities are too crowded.
There are 75 military prisoners in there now and accommodates 150. He is physically separated from the Navy and Marine Corps prisoners.
Hinckley is in the custody of the U.S. Marshal Service. It has provided 25 additional guards, and Hinckley remains under a 24-hour watch. Today, the 25-year-old underwent a court-ordered competency screening. Tests were conducted to learn if Hinckley understands that he has been charged with attempted assassination of the president and to see if he is capable of assisting lawyers in his defense. Federal officials have recovered letters written by Hinckley that reveal he apparently had a fantasy relationship with actress Jodie Foster. And as Hinckley was undergoing psychiatric testing here today, Ms. Foster held a press conference in New Haven.
There are many people that have been very persistent. I cannot speculate as to where Hinckley was. I don't know him, I've never met him, and that's the only thing I know. I'm very remotely involved in anything, and I know very little about anything.
Barbara White, Channel 8 News, Washington. Extraordinary security measures were taken around the U.S. District Courthouse in Washington this morning. John Hinckley arrived in a limousine under heavy protection and was whisked inside the building. Reporters and courtroom artists had been standing in line several hours to obtain one of the limited number of passes to this morning's preliminary hearing. Inside the courtroom, the man accused of attempting to assassinate the president wore a blue sports jacket with a bulletproof vest underneath. The sandy-haired 25-year-old stared down at the table and spoke only once during the brief hearing. "Yes, sir," he said when U.S. Magistrate William Margolis asked if he understood the waiver of preliminary hearing. U.S. Attorney Charles Ruff requested Hinckley be moved to an undisclosed institution for a complete psychiatric evaluation. Attorneys for Hinckley vigorously argued that defense psychiatrists should have the right to evaluate him first. The government attorneys say Hinckley's mental state is going to be an issue in any future proceedings. Hinckley's attorneys believe the U.S. magistrate overstepped his bounds this morning by agreeing to allow the government to transfer Hinckley to an institution for further psychiatric testing. This afternoon, Hinckley and his attorneys were back in court. This time, Hinckley appeared more animated, talking and at one point smiling to his attorneys. U.S. District Judge William Bryant granted a 24-hour delay on the order this morning to allow further psychiatric testing. By afternoon, a crowd of spectators had gathered to watch Hinckley's courthouse departure. Once again, security was stepped up. Hinckley's case now goes to a grand jury to determine if he should be indicted for attempting to assassinate the president. Barbara White, Channel 8 News, Washington.
Tourists crowded the LBJ Library on the University of Texas campus, hoping to get a glimpse of former President Carter. He shook hands with many of them as he and his wife Rosalind were escorted around by Lady Bird Johnson. They were here to get ideas for the library being built near Atlanta in Carter's honor. Carter says his team of researchers have toured other presidential libraries around the country and will begin meeting Monday to finalize plans for his own. Security seemed especially tight as Carter left the library to go just outside for a brief news conference. There he credited the Secret Service with saving President Reagan's life on Monday. He said the agents do a superb job on the almost impossible assignment of protecting presidents who insist on direct contact with lots of people.
They don't try to build a wall around a president like myself, but they try to give me the right to appear here in public, to shake hands with people that I meet, to make public statements and to get to know on a continuing basis the attitude and mores and hopes and dreams of Americans, at the same time protect my life and my safety.
Carter said he'd like to see stricter registration of handguns in the United States. As for the likelihood of his running for president again,
it's much more likely that I'll have a library.
Carol Nealon, Channel 8 News in Austin.
Exploding bullets are not common. Officials say they're normally used when a person intends to do serious harm to his victim. The FBI reportedly found an empty box marked Devastator in John Hinckley's room the night before he allegedly took shots at the president. Most exploding bullets are hollowed out at the tip, filled with an explosive charge. The bullets are meant to explode upon impact. The ammunition was developed to enable law enforcers to shoot skyjackers at high altitudes without having the bullet go through the outer wall of an airplane, causing rapid decompression. But according to Dallas's chief medical examiner, Dr. Charles Petty, it would not have made any difference what type of ammunition was in the .22 caliber gun used in Monday's attack.
Well, I doubt it really if you'd get very much greater effect from an exploding bullet in .22 caliber than you would from an ordinary .22 caliber bullet.
Today, Channel 8 News tested the two types of ammunition. The regular bullet made a small hole as it entered the can and tore through the metal on its way out. The shots fired using the exploding bullet left much the same damage to the can. However, on a target, the exploding bullet left a larger imprint, about the size of a penny. It's impossible to tell here if the bullet actually exploded, and authorities say there are many times when no explosion occurs from these bullets on impact.
Because the material that it strikes against, namely the body's surface, is too soft. It might explode and sometimes does when it contacts bone.
There was no indication that any of the 6 bullets fired Monday exploded. The one that wounded Reagan is believed to have ricocheted off the presidential limousine before entering his left lung. Barbara White, Channel 8 News. A Devastator bullet, hollowed at the tip and filled with an explosive. The bullet's cylindrical cartridge contains a tiny lead-based charge intended to detonate upon impact. The ammunition was developed to enable law enforcers to shoot skyjackers without having the bullet go through the airplane's outer wall, but anyone can buy them. The exploding bullets are not common. Officials say they're normally used when a person intends to do serious harm to his victim. The FBI reportedly found an empty box marked Devastator in John Hinckley's room the night before he allegedly took shots at the president.
Well, I doubt it really if you'd get very much greater effect from an exploding bullet in .22 caliber than you would from an ordinary .22 caliber bullet.
Today, Channel 8 News tested the two types of ammunition. The regular bullet made a small hole as it entered the can and on its way out tore through the metal. The shots fired using the exploding bullet left much the same damage to the can. However, on a target, the exploding bullet left a larger imprint, about the size of a penny. The bullets will not always explode upon impact. FBI authorities say the bullet that struck the president apparently didn't explode. The toxic lead was still intact inside the slug. But authorities say there's a good possibility the bullet that hit Press Secretary Jim Brady and caused damage to part of his brain did explode. Barbara White, Channel 8 News.
First people I'd like to thank is the crew of the DC Fire Ambulance number 4. And the gentleman who helped me on the street when I was shot.
And he'd like to also know who he is. We never got a name on him, and the service is trying to line that up, but if he's out there, we'd like to know. I think Tim wants to thank the doctors especially for being alive, and you want to thank for being Irish?
Yeah, gentlemen, it's great to be alive, and it's grand to be Irish.
Only 12 days after a would-be assassin's bullet pierced his left lung, President Reagan walked out of the George Washington University Hospital. He was accompanied by Mrs. Reagan and daughter Patty Davis. The president was wheeled to the elevator on his floor, but at that point he declared, "I walked in here and I'm going to walk out." Mr. Reagan says he feels great, but he's going to take it easy for a while. Sit down. Shortly after the presidential motorcade pulled off for the 5-minute trip to the White House, the man who kept the nation posted on the president's condition, hospital spokesman Dr. Dennis O'Leary, talked with reporters about the president's workload.
And I think following next week, one could reasonably expect him to be spending probably close to half a day in the Oval Office, maybe a little more, and that also will progress then over time.
As the president's limousine approached the White House, he waved to hundreds of rain-soaked spectators who gathered to cheer him. Once on the White House grounds, the president was welcomed by 100 White House staffers led by Vice President and Mrs. Bush. He thanked them for their support and prayers, then he waved and moved quickly out of the rain. Once inside, the president greeted senior aides with his characteristically quick humor. He looked around the White House and said, "This looks like a nice place." Ray Nunn, ABC News, the White House.